cams are turned off. Make sure that you use the chat box if you have any questions. We'll monitor that as we go. We could answer some of those during the presentation, and some of them we might answer at the end. So today's presenters, my name is Justin Bedox. I am the Urban Program Specialist here at Warren County Soil and Water. And we also have Tessa Wagner here. She's the other Urban Program Specialist that will also be monitoring the chat box for any questions. And then we also have Justin Reinhart. He will be covering the runoff reduction portion of the presentation. So Justin Reinhart, he's an engineer with the Ohio EPA's Division of Surface Water, where his role is to provide engineering assistance to the stormwater program. Justin maintains the Ohio Stormwater Manual titled Rainwater and Land Development. He provides technical support to Ohio EPA staff, the local regulated community, consultants, and developers on Ohio's NPDES construction general permit, which just the new permit just came out. So we've been working on getting that information out to renew those permits. He earned a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering from the Ohio State University, and he's a registered professional engineer in Ohio. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Justin.
Okay, thank you, Justin. We've got the Justin and Justin show here today. Give me 1 second to
the dueling Justins.
Yes, call to share my screen here. I've got so many things open at once. All right, here. Okay, looks like everyone can see that and
looks good.
Hear me, so I will go ahead and turn off the camera just to save the bandwidth for everyone. And as I said, I got so many things open. Let me know if I start to go long here. But I think we'll be relatively quick and get everyone through lunch. Hopefully they've already grabbed a snack or can hold tight for a little bit and then take a late lunch today. But thank you for joining us, and thank you, Justin, for hosting the Urban Chat and this good nice spring Thursday. So as Justin mentioned, I'll go through a little discussion here on the runoff reduction method, runoff reduction volume and credits that are in the Ohio EPA Stormwater Construction General Permit. As many of you know, will be renewed here in a few days. The renewal has a few I'll call them minor in the sense that they're not widespread affecting changes and revisions, none of which impact or affect anything discussed here today. There will be a webinar hosted by Ohio EPA on those changes, as well as a presentation I'll do at the Ohio Stormwater Conference next month. So let's begin with the runoff reduction presentation here today. And the first question, what exactly is it? If you're not familiar, if you've not heard the terminology, what are we talking about? Essentially, a stormwater management strategy that focuses on reducing the volume of runoff generated by a development. That's opposed to some of our more traditional controls where we're looking at decreasing the peak rate of discharge from that runoff generated. This is a volumetric approach, which mirrors the water quality volume, that same volumetric school of thought or handling or hydrology. And the keys to doing that are real simple. First and foremost is the goal of minimizing the disturbance or the disturbed area and the impervious cover of the development. There's not much more to say than that. That becomes there are a number of tools that could be used to minimize widths, shared parking spaces, minimize parking allowances based on zoning. Some of these things obviously are out of the developer or engineer's controls because there are perhaps local ordinances, design ordinances, stormwater ordinances, or other laws and requirements, which in that case are focus or attention turns to those municipalities and local jurisdictions in revising those, or at least reconsidering them. The other is on efficient layouts, utilizing pervious and impervious space as well. And that ties to the second objective, which is to maximize the use of pervious space and its benefits, through which are essentially the ability to infiltrate, evapotranspire, store stormwater, be it direct rainfall or runoff from those impervious surfaces and that adjoin our pervious space. I will probably get those two terms confused as we interchange them here in the next half hour or so. The point I want to emphasize here is there are a lot of different tools at work. When we look at pervious space, there is a large ability to provide services, including storage within the soil matrix, to infiltrate, meaning accept water from the surface. That is the portion of rainfall that we do not see as direct surface runoff. Which may then have an ultimate fate of returning back through evaporation or transpiration, as well as depending on the soil types, more deep percolation to recharge groundwater and base flows and streams. So, we're looking at utilizing those tools, those abstractions, losses, and storage capabilities to minimize the runoff volume. Why do we do that? Two perspectives. First of all, less runoff volume means less pollutant load. So that's our most effective way of treating stormwater, is simply source control, right? And that kind of goes true to many things. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, so to speak. And second of all, it makes use of what are really free, effective services. Now, free comes with a grain of salt because we're placing a value on land and the landscape through the development process. So there's a cost benefit assessment there that happens. But in terms of engineering direct cost, the cost comparison between traditional stormwater infrastructure and the infrastructure supplied here, especially in terms of pollutant reduction and other impacts of the rates and volumes of runoff, are something that makes it worthwhile. So as we dig a little bit further, after minimizing the amount of impervious spaces and areas, the next sort of fundamental component is disconnecting those that we do have to utilize or maximize those pervious open space areas. Those could be large areas, small areas, simply to make them functional or working for us rather than typical landscaping, which serves a beautification purpose, but not much else. So that could be discharge from roof downspouts, such as on the photo on the left, into using just open green yard lawn space, as to the upper right, where we are simply moving our gray infrastructure, our catch basins and surface drains off of the pavement, such that there's a chance for that runoff to work through the grass filter areas. In this case, a median that was probably going to exist right away anyways, or in the lower right, utilizing a channel here, such as a swale, to collect and direct flow to another BMP, as opposed to traditional buried piping. So again, space requirements can vary. These can be multiple use spaces, serving as recreational areas. They could be incorporated into, as I said, right-of-way area that's going to be there anyways, or other cases where they may require space be increased for the BMP, such as the swale on the right, that might otherwise be paved for parking, but perhaps depending on how the dimension and areas work, this area would not be usable pavement anyways if we couldn't fit another travel lane and stall a row through that short little swath. It also may be a perimeter area that meet setback requirements for building and pavement or other local green space requirements or impervious percentage limits. Okay. Step 2 to that is, or the other component is that we use BMPs that mimic natural hydrologic and ecological services. So a lot of folks will want to immediately key in on the natural part of that. And I think these photos are good because they sort of demonstrate the sort of side-by-side comparison of what those natural services are. On the top, a drainage, probably ephemeral type stream coming through some woods compared to an open swale that's designed for drainage. And on the bottom, a low-lying area that may or may not be may qualify as a wetland, but certainly those pocket storage areas that provide surface storage, but also within it the soil and vegetative components that provide treatment mechanisms and allow that water to sit and infiltrate or evapotranspire. So it's not the look we're going for, although these can look similar, and that's sort of how it was first built, but it's replicating the services there through the soil and vegetation. They are engineered. They're not necessarily trying to although it's great to do, preserve the natural system, but an engineered system that mimics those natural tendencies and landscapes. So what I want to do first is just kind of go over 4 key, what I call key understandings or key points, and highlight them that are important in order to make this strategy really work. I should probably point out the fact that the overarching overall strategy is limited in its use to either sites that have the space, as I mentioned, to utilize these BMPs, or where the engineer can configure planned pervious space for beneficial use, or secondly, projects that are from the onset seeking to gain these credits. For example, LEED certification type buildings, mostly probably in the institutional development class or category, where imperviousness is a little bit lower, and there are additional benefits to some of these type of practices from an educational standpoint, or, as I said, other certification or credits through maybe stormwater fees or reduced other forms of assessments and taxes. Okay, so these 4 key understandings. The first one is that the runoff reduction BMPs or practices are, as I said earlier, alluded to, are planned and designed practices. So in order to take credit, they need to be properly sized for the water that they're going to be receiving, the runoff. And that's not to say that this is high level engineering we're doing. We're using plantings and soil and grasses, but there's a couple steps that need to be accounted for to make sure the BMP is going to work as we anticipate and the proper credit can be given. So I'm not going to go through those different criteria in detail here. We don't have the time to do that, but I would encourage you to consult the Rainwater and Land Development Manual, as Justin the First mentioned in the introduction. And there's a specific chapters on these practices, the 5 that are solely runoff reducing practices, the disconnection practices, filter strips and conservation areas, the grass swale, and 2 that are a little bit odd in that they're not typical in the sense that they're infiltrating water into runoff into groundwater, but provide very similar losses in green roofs and the rainwater harvesting systems in terms of being able to abstract runoff for other uses. As with that said, in order to make it work just like any other BMP, stormwater pond bioretention cell, they need to be planned early in the development process. They don't work nearly as well subsequently trying to connect or disconnect areas from planned layouts. Just as a quick example, a simple pavement disconnection here, as I show you on a photo on the left, how that might look from runoff from a pavement flowing through a grass area before it hits that receiving inlet, would be sized here to have a minimum area, a width matching the pavement, a length, that being in the direction of flow, so that you can see there's a certain amount of time and space for runoff to be abstracted before it reaches that catch basin. Making sure, probably first and foremost, that we maintain sheet flow. If we have a gully form and water flowing in a concentrated manner, it's going to bypass all the things that we're intending to do here. So the key to most all of these practices are spreading flow. And when I mention flow, runoff, etc., remember I'm looking at it from a water quality volume standpoint. So that leads me to the second highlight here, is that, again, touching back to what I said earlier, the water quality volume is it's a little bit different in terms of our traditional H&H or hydrology and hydraulic engineering, and that it's representative of the annual volume of runoff we receive every year, which around the state is plus or minus 35 to 40 inches a year. We're trying to capture a certain percentage of that and treat it, or in this case, make it disappear. The concept there is that the vast majority of that 35 to 40 inches comes to us in our small rains, the small summer showers, the short thunderstorms on the order of a ½ inch to an inch. So hence we have a 0.9 inch water quality volume requirement, as opposed to the big news items, the 2, 3, 4, in the case of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, here in the last week or two, 14 inches of rain that caused the problems and receive all the news. Ultimately, the practices work best as, in a sense, as a treatment train, where they can slowly abstract a portion of that volume, decreasing the ultimate size of the final primary BMP. So in many cases, that catch basin will still be outletting to a stormwater pond that will provide other services, but that pond will now be smaller. And they can also be, as I said, in a treatment train sense, they can be stacked in or ordered so that one practice flows into another. The spreadsheet you see here, or Excel sheet, is available to you on our website, and it helps with the crediting calculation, but it's built in order to have at least some logical flow from one BMP to another BMP. So using a simple disconnection to go into a filter strip, as I show here, the 1 to the 2, and then into a pond with those credits adding up. Now, as I said, the credits themselves are not very large in many cases, and may not be the ultimate driver of these of this process, unless they're used throughout the development such that they can begin to add up and actually make quite a large dent in the size of the final BMP needed, which may still need to be present to service any local flood control requirements or peak discharge critical storm requirements. Okay, just real quickly, and I'm going to show you the spreadsheet later, but one common question or confusing point is on this is that, as I said, there's two components really to all of these practice, and one is how much runoff are we putting into the practice or to the practice, and that's the drainage area of the to that BMP, which is generally the first 1 or 2 columns in green, is where you would input that. How much of that parking lot from the previous slide is draining into this filter strip? And then that second set of columns is the actual size of the filter strip or the grass area receiving runoff, or the BMP itself. I guess this is more 2A than 3 the way I presented it, but just to I guess elaborate a little bit more on everything I just mentioned, I want to emphasize the point that the runoff reduction credits are small, but in terms of what we're trying to achieve, they can be very powerful. The graph here was produced by a colleague and former holder of my position, Dr. Dorsey, with currently with Ohio State. formerly DNR and the Ohio EPA. So it's a bit old. It only goes through 1999, but I really like it because what he's done is just lumped the count of events, giving you a sum total here based on depth, and this is for the Dayton area. And you can see that clearly the vast majority of our rainfall and what attributes to that total of 35 to 40 inches are coming in very small storms. So just capturing 0.2 inches, or as you look back to that spreadsheet, roughly what the runoff reduction credits are getting, it captures a tremendous amount of the total runoff from a site and puts it through either loss, abstraction, or treatment if it's just being filtered perhaps through that grass area. The water quality volume is our small event, so that 0 to 1.2, all of those boxes are now captured in our overall BMP or system or treatment train as the water quality volume. That's 0.9 inches when you calculate it, but really what this is referencing is the fact that that's routed through events in order to make the calculation simple. So ultimately, you're collecting more than just that 0.9 inch event, but slightly higher in grand total. And of course, everything else are those rare but large storms are flood control in our world. So again, the point there, everything is volumetric based. We're not concerned about runoff interval, event-based design. What that makes is it for very easy calculations. What it doesn't do is give us good protection for large events, meaning we still need to consider what are the impacts of these large rains on the site and or perhaps neighboring properties, and will there be any detrimental flooding cost? Again, also why these work best in a system where there's ultimately an end game primary BMP. It also is the reason why they are best suited for smallish sites, not to take the entire site and try and fit it through one filter strip, but distribute small filter strips handling very small sub watersheds within the particular development. Okay, and I guess highlight key point number 4. Soil plays a major role in runoff reduction. And it's not just the name of the map unit or the hydrologic soil grouping that we will first gravitate towards as engineers as we use in calculations, but what those represent, which are the more detailed, finer points and properties of the specific soil on site. I think back to my schooling in civil engineering, and I was really hyper focused on the water element. I loved and got into this position and career because I found that fascinating, the movement of water. Thought maybe I'd build dams someday or something interesting like that, and didn't quite make it to that level. But looking back retrospectively, I've talked to a lot of students and up and coming engineers, and always said the one thing I wish I would have learned more about and they would have focused on in engineering curriculums were soils. And that was something I had a benefit of being able to learn about in my previous position with the Division of Soil and Water at ODNR and Department of Agriculture. But I digress a little bit here. The point is we look at texture. A lot of times we gravitate towards sands. Yep, they'll infiltrate, clays won't. And leave it at that. And that is important, but most soils are a mix and they're also layered like a cake. So we have a profile that in which these properties vary potentially drastically. It's also a misnomer to say that, or maybe a misunderstanding to say clays won't infiltrate. They can and do, and sometimes very well. It depends on the conditions. So the quality of the soil. So we have sand, silts, and clays, but they're not all the same. So compacted, damaged, and that damage could be through construction, that could be through agricultural practices beforehand. It can create plow pans, compaction that degrade soil quality and reduce the typical properties of that particular soil type or unit. So with that said, the key goal here is preservation restoration. Can we maintain, if we have good quality soils, can we maintain them for use in which we will maximize the benefits? Or do we need to perhaps do some restoration work so we can improve the benefits of soil? This is one of my favorite photos from a site, not terribly untypical to see large cuts for development. This is at the edge of the property. I don't know if that's 4 or 5 feet. I can't remember, maybe a little bit less. But what I like it is you can clearly see, soil strata. Color is not the most important thing when it comes to soils, but 9 out of 10 people will gravitate towards topsoil, the black color, the richness of it and the feel of it, and say, that's good. I want that in my garden. And all that yellowish, brownish, grayish stuff is bad, and it's clay, and I don't want that. And you can see the permeation of roots through that upper soil layer, but what you see is a very deep topsoil layer, and that's very key. That typical 6 to 12 inches, some cases more, some cases might be less, depending on the current or previous agricultural conditions. That's where all the work is being generated, in that top layer. So once we cut below that, we are into those heavy, dense subsoils and lose all of the benefits that we just talked about. So we need to preserve or recreate that. On the lower left is just a quick slide, graphic, I guess, from a completely unrelated paper on biowaste. But what I really wanted to use there is just a graphic to demonstrate a key overlooked component and reason we have topsoil or an A horizon is the not just the tilth, but the organic component. So the breakdown of debris, the detritus, the roots, the microorganisms that create organic matter, which act as a sponge. They're what give it soil its structure, create the pore space for storage, provide treatment mechanisms through biological processes, and support the vegetative growth through nutrients, and hold water within the soil. So we need to not just make sure we have loose soil and a certain type of color soil, but that we have a rich organic soil at the surface. So those are my 4 key points. And as I mentioned with the last one, everything ties. As engineers, we want to tie to the hydrologic soil groups developed by the USDA, which really comprise a lot of these elements and are good for our assessments from runoff calculations. And we will, because of that tie to them in terms of the crediting. So the credit values are split. So a higher credit is placed on practices built on the A or B soils, which would be a more infiltrative soil, and a lower credit value on the C or D soils, which are generally tend to be more restrictive towards infiltration, producing more runoff. I did a quick assessment of Warren County, and this may or may not be terribly accurate. I took the largest area I could through the web soil survey and just did a quick summation of the soil groups and hope that that's fairly representative, although there are a number of different larger soil regions within the county in Southwest Ohio. But I think this is probably pretty representative of much of the state, actually, in looking at the numbers, in that we have a very small percentage of A and B soils, generally alluvial deposits, sands and gravels, alongside our rivers and streams, or through prehistoric stream beds, or prehistoric beach ridges to the north part, or our glacial deposit end moraines, caves and eskers that are also isolated around the glaciated parts of the state. But it's a very small percent, and those are the our target areas, because they can take in a tremendous amount of water, and we would love to place and BMPs and utilize those areas as best we can. However, most of us are going to be in the C and D range, and a lot in Warren County appear to be in that C range. And the reason I want to bring this up is, again, we said earlier that's on the low end from an infiltrative standpoint, and we see those numbers of 20 to 40% clay and think, well, this isn't really going to do much for us. But yeah, it's important to remember it's not just texture, but a number of things, including the landscape and landform. And sea soils have within that profile somewhere often a layer that is basically blocking infiltration from occurring. So it doesn't mean we have clay from top to bottom, but we have somewhere something in it. Could be a clay, could be a fragipan plate, or other type of restriction, including groundwater. The groundwater table being high. It may also be places where we have depressions that simply don't have an outlet to release that water. So it has nothing to do but sit. It's not necessarily a measure of permeability, but what is the ultimate fate in terms of runoff of that rainfall. So just to dive on that into the weeds a little bit more, when I look at these sea soils, it really begs the question of, well, what do I have there and what can I do? How could this be a benefit? So one that is somewhat prevalent in at least parts of Warren County, the Xenia silt loam is a sea soil, and we see some silts and clays, and the clays again in here, runoff capacity is low and we are moderately well drained. So we see sort of some mixed bag on, well, what do we have here in terms of infiltration versus runoff? And a lot of it probably keys on what I've highlighted here into the properties and qualities: depth to a restrictive layer, 40 to 60 inches to a densic material, so a dense layer. And we see that again in the chart here that shows a little bit of the clay content in the profile. Most soils start out very low in the topsoil, very hummocky and loamy. Then we hit our subsoils, our clay content goes up, but then it gradually goes down as we proceed through the profile below, in some cases, 20%, which is a reasonably infiltrating soil. What does that do for us? Well, we got this densic layer down there. Well, that's going to give us a perched seasonal high water table. So now we're going to have that water occupying the space above it in which we could be infiltrating stormwater. And as the last sort of highlight says here, the saturated conductivity is moderately high in the solum, or the upper part, low to moderately high, so quite ranging in the underlying dense tills. What does all this mean? When I look at this, I see lots of potential opportunities and questions. Where am I grading and filling the soil? If I'm grading down within that 40 to 60 range, I might be sitting right on top of that dense material and severely limiting the potential for any infiltration. I could perhaps look at a bioretention cell that reaches through and below that into more permeable subsoils that would take infiltration better. Overall point, not to get too terribly deep into the weeds or specifics on this, are need to thoroughly assess, what are our soil conditions and how can we best utilize them. Okay, so that's sort of just overview of some thoughts before we dig too deep into the practices and the application of them. I'll call your attention to the current permit language, and as of now, and this shouldn't change here in the next few days, but this will be the exact same in the sixth generation of the permit, which starts here in this weekend. And in that it says that the director may consider these practices to demonstrate compliance with post-construction requirements 3G2E for site not draining to a common, or for areas of the site not draining into a common drainage system, and where the permittee can demonstrate the intent of pollutant removal and stream protection is accomplished there, and that requires review and approval by Ohio EPA. So that language has actually been in the last couple generations of the permit. We just called it green infrastructure before runoff reduction practices. But the point here is that through this process, which we've established, that being the standards in the rainwater manual and the crediting system through the spreadsheet, that's our review, our meaning Ohio EPA's review and approval. So we've approved this process to utilize for these areas, and perhaps where I think most interest lies in, as pointed out here, things like rear yards or low density non-traditional developments, park space areas, for example. So when we talk about perimeter areas, how can it be utilized? This is from a recent site. So again, you can tell from here, this is in this particular example, it's a low low impervious development, somewhat of an institutional building coming in here, where there's a paved roadway extending around the building that defines sort of the boundary of the project and does not flow into the drainage areas highlighted here in yellow and described as undetained, or 1.01 acres overall. I'm only showing you, I think, half of that in the picture of that 7 acres site. You can also see we have plenty of space and property extending beyond the actual project site. And what we can do here is simply use that area. Hopefully from that photo, you can tell that that's heavily vegetated, forested. We can use that as a conservation area. We have our area sheet flowing off of the pavement into that. We can dedicate what amounts to using the spreadsheet for the 26-foot wide pavement, an area swath of about 45 feet on these C&D soils, and define that as a conservation easement, or I should say conservation area. And that water, that runoff is then treated, in the water quality volume obligation for that 1.01 acres is attained through the conservation area. Just pause for a second, because I think what I'm going to do is continue on and then try. Maybe we'll pull up the spreadsheet to show you here later, so I don't have to do the technical dance back and forth between Excel and the PowerPoint. The other example is in a residential scenario setting. So 2 different directions this goes. That one being large lot developments, which we see from time to time. So something on the order of 2-acre lots or more, in which case, obviously, there's plenty of space that could be utilized for these practices. And the other are maybe more medium density developments, and which tend to be a little bit more cookie cutter in design, in that the lots are fairly identical. Maybe, here and there shapes will change as we reach cul-de-sacs and corners and whatnot, but by and large, they generally tend to be approximately the same size, and the homes and building pads generally tend to be about the same size, and locations within the lots as well. So, something like this, one of obviously 40 homes going into a subdivision. We've got a boundary lot here, and it is almost a half acre in size. We've got a building lot for typical home dimensions here shown. I assume these are falling within the typical world. If not, then let me know. But I've used this example a couple times before. But I look at a site where I can capture the front half in my storm network, and I have a back half I don't know what to do with here. So that would be roughly 1/4 of an acre, and the back half of the house, which is I put down here 1,800 square feet, or 0.04 acres. So the spreadsheet, you can enter this in this case, I'm doing just a typical lot. A typical calculation that would be assumed to apply to all of the lots. And by typical, it should be pretty well average. There may be some, we can't get too particular on the numbers. There may be some where they're a little short. Hopefully that's offset by a few lots that are a little bit large, but it certainly wouldn't be able to expect people to do this 40-something times. And what could I use in terms of runoff reduction practices here? Well, the first is if I can disconnect those downspouts, have them flowing out into the grass. Now, reasons why this is good and bad from a development standpoint. Obviously, homeowners generally aren't fond of standing water, or want water to move away from the foundation of a house structurally. So, there's certain criteria here that we need to make sure that we can do both of those. But I can designate a grass receiving area for, in this case, 2 downspouts of a certain size, and apply the credit through the spreadsheet here. So if I were to look at the water quality volume that we're and these numbers get small. Again, this is a typical times 40, a water quality volume of 162 cubic feet, again, small. I'm now subtracted out through this disconnection 40 cubic feet. I still have 122 cubic feet that might flow into a rear yard catch basin and then into my pond. Now I've reduced the size of the pond. That may or may not help or be of benefit to you. Perhaps more beneficial might be to dedicate a portion of that lot as a conservation area to absorb the remainder of the water quality volume. In this case, 30 feet of that lot would be left in a conservation area. Using the credits in that square footage, I'm now deducting another 122 cubic feet, effectively zeroing out the water quality volume owed for that lot. So that's the quick and simple math to it. I don't want it to seem too hard, but I also don't want it to seem too simple in terms of these practices, as I said, are design planned practices. Now, the question there becomes, I guess, kind of how do we evidence all of this, and what do we do in terms of submittals? Well, as I alluded to, we have the spreadsheet that is created, which would do the math for you from a crediting standpoint. The BMPs need to be identified on the plans and then the SWPPP, including where they're at, where are their dimensions, any soil restoration activities that might occur, preservation activities. Typical drawings are probably feasible in the example I just gave. Others may need to be individually, if these are very large. We've got the 5 acre, we've got a handful of 5 acre lots. Maybe these need to be individually called out as to their designs. The last bullet on legal instruments is a question that we've had and haven't been able to generate a real detailed answer on, but moving backwards one slide, the impervious disconnection areas are a low credit, low level type practice. I don't think they're going to be very easily to maintain and enforce in the long term. We expect them to be set up right from the get-go, but the fact they're duplicating as private yards means there's probably going to be some changes that occur. And that's just something that's going to have to, I think, be tolerated under the assumption that we're still going to have a considerable amount of grass area and benefit, even if we lose part of that. And that's not such a big deal, given that, as you see, the credit is small. Now, on the other hand, the conservation area represents the primary BMP in this case, and its loss would effectively negate the treatment. So those areas we'd like to see protected in some manner. If they're HOA property, that would be ideal. If they are going to be within the lot boundary, and then perhaps through conservation easement or some other easement, maintaining them in if it's grass, filter strip in a maintained grass, or in this case in a unmaintained forested brush, meadow, grass type area. Pros and cons to that may be very desirable, some communities and actually amenity in properties, and others, obviously, they're going to want a 4-inch turf fescue grass. And those are decisions that will need to be made by the designer and developer as to the practicalities. So I guess in terms of what detail wise, what we're looking for there is the fact that, as I alluded to, once landowners, homeowners move in, these practices aren't going to be viewed as a stormwater for having a stormwater purpose like the pond up front will be. And so we need to take some sort of measures to at least help safeguard it. That those some options, I guess, are spelled out in the Rainwater and Land Development Manual as far as terms of tools that could be used, from like I said, these legal protections and legal instruments such as easements and deed restrictions to educational tools, other potential ideas that might be out there in securing their definitions to plat maps and deeds, etc. That's again, I think where we're at. It's maybe not the clearest answer, but hopefully gives more detailed guidance or some detailed guidance. While I'm on the topic and before we wrap up, I do just want to mention that you know, the rainwater manual is online, and if you, I should have put a link on here. Our website's changed a couple times now since I've been at EPA. They like to do that on me. So I don't have a link. You can certainly probably Google it, but it is maintained there online solely, and we are. The agency, through mostly me, are in the process of improving, expanding, and updating that. And as things change or any announcements come, including training opportunities such as this particular webinar, or fact sheets that might come out, or anything else that comes out on the technical end, not the permitting end, you want to know about it, you can subscribe to my email list. This is the quick process. You go to that ohioepa.custhelp.com website, click on the subscribe to updates. It will require you to create a user password that protects you from being subscribed or unsubscribed to this without your consent. You will see under subscriptions on then the Division of Surface Water, there's a rainwater land development bar. Just click on the subscribe tool. There are a number of other the various groups and divisions within the agency have a number of different newsletters you may be interested in subscribing as well. So there's my plug for that. And what I'll do here, if we have time, is first, my contact information is on screen. I'm going to try and pull up the spreadsheet and see if we can answer any questions quickly, because I want to still leave 10 minutes or so for Justin the first to talk about So I'm believing you can see my screen here, and it is now changed over to the spreadsheet.
Yep, you can see that.
Appreciate the confirmation. So I just I have in here populated that example really quickly. So let me even start from the beginning. The first page allows you to put in your project information, and where I have 4 different tabs. So say you had a site that was going to use 4 different not BMPs, but 4 sub areas. Maybe you're going to take half the parking lot to a filter strip, and the on the perimeters, and maybe the internal part of the parking lot went to a bioretention cell, and the islands, you could designate those as different areas, up to 4 different areas. You could use more spreadsheets if it gets more complicated, but that's as many as we built in for now. And it will total everything on this first page from the 4 different areas. And lastly, because we go back and forth in the spreadsheet, unfortunately, these are small areas, so square feet tend to work well, but most of our calculations present ourselves in acres, so we just throw that calculator in the end just to make life easy for you. But or I just type the formula straight in the cells. I don't think I did it here, but what you'll do is for one of these areas, and I've used this tab these for a few different things. Let me move to area D, which is where the calculation I want is. You can see up top, so you plug in the drainage area for this particular sub area and the amount of impervious. So we had in this case, in this example, was just a tick over 1 acre from that perimeter driveway draining into a conservation area. So what I'll do here is just go down, find the last BMP or sheet flow to a conservation area. I said I was in C. This is not the C/D hydrologic soil group category, but C or D soils. And I had that put in now in terms of square feet, my 1.01 acres of roadway, and I had no grass going into it or pervious area. And moving over to the next green input box, I've added in my swath of conservation area, and you can see here on the formula box I just put in 1.75 acres times to get this into the right times the conversion factor here to get this into the right units, and was able to effectively, yeah, not quite, but pretty darn close to zeroing out the water quality volume. Of course, I think sensible decisions here. We're making this a even 1424, I can't remember what our dimension was, square foot, rather than a 14.01 wide swath to get this to zero is probably acceptable. But if I were to maybe first use in disconnection, I would simply go in here and into the impervious surface disconnection and plug that in first, plugging in my 43,996. And maybe I had I don't know, let's just put 10,000 square feet of this grass disconnection before I got to, this would be grass I wanted to mow maybe along that boundary before I got into the wooded area. I could have that as the first practice. Then over in this last column, I connect that to the proper BMP, which was sheet flow to conservation area, and it will build everything. So now what's coming left, what the water quality volume owed from the simple disconnection will go into the conservation area, and I will total down here a negative value. So that worked to get me all the way to zero. Okay, so if we have time for questions, I want to leave some time to talk about the local requirements there, but anything I can answer now?
I don't see any questions in the chat box, but if anyone has a question, feel free to enter that. Don't think we have any questions here, Justin.
Okay. Well, again, you can contact me at the phone number and email I provided at any time. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. And we're running up here at the end of the hour, so I'm going to continue here with some open space regulations. Feel free if you guys need to duck out or anything like that. Let's see here. All right, so going to zoom out here a little bit, talk about urban sprawl and open spaces, density bonuses, and how we can use some of these runoff reduction methods or other infiltration practices to also count for stormwater control. So earlier this year, we had our strategic planning meeting. The table I was sitting at, I had developers, contractors, gentlemen from the Planning Commission at my table. One of the questions that was asked was, what do you think the goals are for Warren County soil and water in terms of natural resources management in Warren County? And one of the responses that I liked was from the Regional Planning Commission. He mentioned that, that we want to promote development. We need development, but we also want to preserve this rural aesthetic that we have in the county and try to have less urban sprawl and have more open spaces. So, basically want to balance urban development with agriculture. We have farmland preservation programs here. We're seeing lots of development, urbanization in the county, encroaching into rural agricultural areas. And there's a nice picture here on the right of Los Angeles, some pretty good urban sprawl, not seeing a whole lot of open space or green space. There's all sorts of problems that come with urban sprawl, lack of public places like parks and playgrounds that can lead to social isolation and community disengagement. You have an increase in air pollution, traffic congestion. Sometimes you're only 5 minutes away, 5 miles away from your location, but it takes an hour to get there. So are there ways that we can create more open space while also increasing urban density in order to reduce urban sprawl? So talking about urban density bonuses in these areas. So when I looked at the Warren County Rural Zoning Code, this applies to all unincorporated areas of the county. This is from Article 2, Chapter 3. They have this conservation design option that where you can gain up to 50% residential density bonus if open space is increased. The lot dimensions can also vary when using this option, so you can deviate from the typical lot frontage and width. There's different types of open space uses that are accepted. You have recreational category, natural resource preservation, and also for agricultural uses. So you have this table here that shows minimum lot sizes and the district density units per acre. So the RU residential unit, or I think that's rural residential. So you have a base density of 0.20 units per acre and a minimum lot size of 1.25 acres. The R-1A has a little bit of a higher base density. And so you can actually gain a 30% density bonus to that base density if the open space requirement is met. So for the RU, it says that 40% of the total project area shall be open space. For the R1A, you need to have 30% open space. But if you bump that open space up to 50%, you can add an additional 10% to that bonus, that density bonus. You can get an additional 5% more if it's for agricultural enhancement, another 2.5% for natural resources enhancement. And I checked, and that does include stormwater control. And then another 2.5% more for if you have any kind of historic buildings on the property. So in the end, you can get up to a 50% total density bonus while also satisfying stormwater treatment requirements if those infiltration practices are implemented. So trying to tie this together with Justin's talk about runoff reduction method, and can we get, two birds with one stone here? No animals were harmed in this production, by the way. But so that was the rural zoning codes. And now, so I also looked at incorporated areas. And so these vary a little bit from, town to town here. But for City of Mason, for the PUDs, they have an open space requirement of 20% of the total project area. And both retention and detention ponds can count as open space if they're partially dedicated to recreational use. So that's another thing I've seen is they'll typically, some of them, they will not allow the detention ponds, the dry basins, because they don't have as much of a recreational value to them. People like to have standing water and birds and ducks and things and paths to walk by. So some of them will include the detention ponds in that bonus, but other ones won't. Deerfield Township, 20% open space is their minimum. But the open space must also be common area to the development. So not just, one person's house. It needs to be accessible to the whole development. You have all mixed residential developments should have up to 30%. And then park residential developments should include at least 40% open space. City of Lebanon, they have 20% of any new subdivision must be set aside for open space. Only half of that land that's set aside for open space could be used for stormwater management. So, so it's not all of it not all of that space could be used for stormwater. Just keep that in mind. Any land containing stormwater retention ponds or other bio retention devices like rain gardens, they could count as open space. When you have a recreational value added. So you're thinking trails, fountains, gazebos, things like that. So they will not count the detention basins here towards as open space due to that lack of recreational value. South Lebanon, their projects, the PUD projects must contain at least 20% open space. And again, up to half of that could be used for drainage easements. Must have recreational features or be left natural and undeveloped. City of Franklin, they were a little bit different, a little bit more vague, I think, on theirs. A little bit more flexible though as well. So they say they must have open space, but they don't really outline a distinct percentage. The planned residential conservation overlay district. So they do want to maximize conservation of open space. They have a 25 acre minimum. And 30% of that shall be open space in that conservation overlay district. One of their 6 objectives is to reduce stormwater runoff and improve the water quality from runoff. So again, these infiltration practices, runoff reduction, I think that would apply to theirs as well, pretty good. Down in Morrow, you have 25% of the total lot or parcel shall be dedicated as open space. No more than 25% can include water bodies or wetlands. So a little bit more stringent on theirs. The other ones were up to 50%. They're a little bit lower that they would accept. They have density bonuses that you can get. Basically 1% density bonus per additional 1% of open space created past the minimum, up to a maximum of 15%. Hamilton Township, minimum of 20% open space for the project area. 15% of that must be common areas. And no more than 35% of that could be used for retention or detention. So just keep that in mind, that they can't use all of it, but you can get bonuses here for doing this stuff. And then Clear Creek Township, 25% shall be dedicated as a common area open space, and 25% of that open space could be used for detention basins. They have more allowances given for retention basins due to having the water feature and the increased recreational value. But other runoff reduction practices incorporated into the open space areas can be allowed as well. So you have these this extra open space you're creating, and what can we do with it? So we were thinking in stormwater control practices that those can count to an extent. As long as you have these recreational components built in, that'll increase the value and the density that those density credits you can get. So just a good example here, South Lebanon, they applied and qualified for our Operation Rain Garden grant. We awarded them $50,000 or $60,000. They developed this bioswale to help with alleviate drainage problems they had in the area. So this was the existing conditions. You can see the topography, it's draining this way, kind of to the left and then to the bottom here. And you have an existing building down here, a house, and some trees over here. So, but they had some drainage problems in the area. You had a parking lot here, so impervious surface, lots of sheet flow coming down. And so this was already an existing project, and that this bioswale was put in after the fact. But the bioswales could probably be built into the SWPPP design, into the subdivision design from the get-go, and probably get those runoff reduction credits that Justin talked about earlier. So here is the design of the bioswale. It's kind of an L shape here. Collecting that sheet flow, allowing it to infiltrate into the detention area. They put an under drain in here with a dry well to let that stormwater soak in. That way it's disconnected from the stormwater drains and things like that. So just letting it soak into the ground and infiltrate. So here's a after picture. You can see the mulched area and the gravel channel in here, and just sheet flow coming in off of the parking lot and letting that infiltrate. So, and this is just from the other direction looking back. And I do believe they're going to plant some more plants in there, do some more landscaping. So wrapping it up here. I know it went over a little bit, but thanks for everybody who hung in there. We do have an upcoming urban chat in August, I believe, and we'll be talking about soils in that chat. So I know Justin talked about soils earlier and how you know, you want to have certain soils to increase that infiltration rate. We also have our development digest blog on our website. If you're interested in learning more about stormwater management and compliance, there's the link. WarrenSWCD.com. You could find it there. We also have our past urban chats can be found on our YouTube channel. This one will be recorded and uploaded. If you want to take a look back and look at some of those details in Justin's portion. If you guys have any ideas for other urban chats, send them my way at justin.bedox@co.warren.oh.us. So I want to thank you guys for attending, and especially thanks to Justin Reinhart with the Ohio EPA for donating his time to come talk about the runoff reduction method. And so we have his email, and there's my email if you guys have any other questions. If you have any other questions regarding those zoning codes and open space regulations, I'm not an expert in that, but I would recommend contacting either the Regional Planning Commission or any of those local townships or cities, their zoning departments. So do we have any other questions for anybody before we take off here? Oh, okay. Thank you, Valerie. Thanks for tuning in. Good to see you. So, all right. Don't see any questions. Feel free to email us, like I said, and we'll see you in August at the next Urban Chat. Take care.